My name is Jennifer Flanagan, and I'm so thrilled to be here today. I am the president and CEO of Actua, and I would like to acknowledge that I am in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Actua, I'm really happy to have the chance for you to get to know us a little bit better. We are Canada's largest STEM outreach organization. We annually engage 350,000 youth in accessible, inclusive STEM outreach programs. Together, we represent a network of 43 organizations located at universities and colleges. Some of you have joined us today, which is wonderful. We work together to increase the skills and the confidence of youth while we also relentlessly break down and remove barriers to youth engaging in STEM fields. This past Tuesday, as you know, was the International Day of the Girl. And this year, the theme of that day was about equality in access to technology and technology careers and education for girls. I loved that the day also included a very specific call to action for increased investing in programming that would allow girls not only to gain the skills, but have access to and to lead in this space, which we all know is so critical. Although Canada is one of the most developed and diverse countries in the world, many youth in Canada are still struggling to get proper access to technology, whether that be to hardware or to the internet. And that is especially true for girls and young women. What we call that, and what the theme of today really is to talk about, is the gender digital divide. And just to give you a couple of what I think are still stats that stop me in my tracks and really propel this discussion forward. One of them is that only 45% of households in rural communities in Canada actually have access to unlimited broadband, and you can start to understand and imagine what kind of challenges that has created forever, but also through this period of the pandemic. From a corporate perspective, we know that women are underrepresented. Only 13% of tech companies have executives who are women. 53% of those companies in Canada don't have any women at the executive level. Actua has done a lot of digging into this to understand the differences in attitudes and thoughts of girls and boys in this field. We have actually recently completed a survey that showed that boys are actually twice as likely to express an interest in careers in technology as girls, and also express twice the confidence levels as girls in tech and coding related topics. So we know, and we've all experienced, that the pandemic has actually exacerbated some of these challenges and created even further barriers. We also know that access to technology now is not a luxury or a nice to have. It's essential both for engagement and education, but also engagement in the social sphere and social inclusion. Girls are facing the same barriers again that have just been elevated. And those barriers, which we've all heard about and many of us experienced, things like gender-based stereotypes, unrealistic societal expectations, gendered cyber threats, a lack of support from key influencers like parents and teachers. All of these things really limiting and creating further barriers to girls contributing to designing our digital future. But the good news is that's all, sort of setting the stage. But the good news is that we can, of course, bridge this digital divide. And I'm, again, so grateful to be joined by women on this call today who are doing that work, who themselves are technology innovators and leaders, or who are leading organizations that are working to bridge that gap. So a few housekeeping issues before we get started with the panel. One is that I really want to take a moment to recognize our co-presenter, TD Bank Group. TD has been a wonderful partner and supporter of Actua since 2017, specifically working to help us engage even more girls and young women in STEM programs to date, reaching over 150,000 girls. So want to thank TD for their engagement and support. And then just to let you know that at the end, we will be doing a Q&A. So at any time, we invite you to share your comments, your questions in the chat, and we'll moderate that and make sure we get some time at the end to speak to the panelists. So essentially, just to tell you quickly, we're going to go through and do some introductions of these wonderful, wonderful women, and then I'll ask them each some specific questions related to the topics, and we'll go from there into what I think will be a really interesting discussion. So I'm going to start by asking each of you to introduce yourselves. Your stories are so diverse and so interesting, but please do tell us how you come at this this topic. So we're going to start with you, Eugenia.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I'm really excited to be here. My name is Eugenia Addy, and I'm the CEO of Visions of Science. We work with youth from low-income and racialized communities to really empower them through STEM and really promote STEM equity. So this is right up my alley, and I'm really excited to be here. As an introduction, as a young Black woman in STEM who had to navigate through many different things in elementary school, this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. Navigating through just perceived barriers and real barriers has been a challenge. And I think when we consider just intersectionality and how race can play an impact, it's definitely been something. So I think what's really important about this panel and important about this topic is I have a lot of stories, but I realized in sharing my story that I had so many people that were like, the exact same thing happened to me. So many women that were like, the exact same thing happened to me. So this is not anecdotal. This is real, this is happening, and we really need to make a concerted effort to address these barriers. So I'm really excited to be part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Mannetti, and I'm thrilled to be on this panel with such fantastic women. A little bit about me is that I am a Bachelor of Technology student at McMaster University. I'm focusing on biotechnology, and I'm graduating very shortly, which I'm quite excited about. And I'm also currently a co-director at Venture Academy, which is a network member of Actua. I began working with them right after my first year of university, and I've grown with that organization. And my world was not always about STEM. I actually went to a performing arts focused high school for a specialized dance program. And I had a very supportive family and mentors that opened my eyes to STEM. And it made me really realize that that was an option for me. And I thank the people in my life every day that got me to where I am. And I understand that not everyone has those mentors in their life. So that's what really pushed me towards working with Venture and making sure that other youth had mentors. And I realized I could be that mentor for people to help them really consider different career paths in technology and in STEM in general. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today.
That's so great, Julie. Thank you. Denise.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks everyone for joining this morning and being part of this virtual circle. Yeah, my name is Denise Williams. I come from the Cowichan tribes, which is Coast Salish territory here in British Columbia on my father's side. I'm British on my mother's side, and I'm residing today on the unceded ancestral traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh people. And I'm the CEO of the First Nations Technology Council, has been my labor of love for the last 10 years, and built the strategic plan and the business plan for the First Nations Technology Council while doing an MBA at SFU. So that's my way of just acknowledging that I'm not a technologist, but certainly someone who is passionate about leading an organization that is given mandates from the First Nations Summit, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and the BC Assembly of First Nations. So we serve at the pleasure of the 203 First Nations communities in BC to ensure that they have the right to determine how technology will be integrated into their communities and how this will support the advancement of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I'll just acknowledge that I forgot to close my office door, so I'm also introducing you to my cat, Huxley. Sorry.
That's okay. That's wonderful. Thank you, Denise. It's so nice to have you here. Kim, I'll throw it to you.
Hi, I'm Kim George. I'm National Manager, Enterprise Business Solutions for Toyota Canada. My teams are responsible for the complete technology solution from start for the business through to, working with our dealers. I'm really fortunate that I work for a company that really does empower women in leadership. But what I will say is being in automotive and being in technology, there are certain biases that come with that. So for anyone starting out, I would not shy away from it, but it becomes even more important that we become our advocates, the coach and mentor, the empowerment of women as we go through it. True story, I started my career in finance. I actually have a bachelor's degree, a Bachelor of Commerce in Finance, worked 2 years as a financial analyst, and realized very quickly I wanted to be a technology analyst. And where did that realization come from? It came right back to my schooling, where I did really, really well in computer science, but nobody said to me, "You're really good at computers and math. Why wouldn't you explore that?" Instead, I went into business and very quickly learned technology was actually much more interesting. It allowed me opportunities to work with teams and leadership, and it empowered other skills and troubleshooting. And for the record, technology is not just about I'm installing a server or doing application development. It's so much more than that. And I hope all of you look back at what you're good at and take advantage of that, because it's something I made that mistake and nobody pointed it out to me. And it's something, if I can pass one thing along today, it's take it and be proud of the fact that, hey, I'm good at math, I'm good at computer science, and run with it.
That is such a common experience, Kim. So thank you for sharing that. Jen.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you very much for having me. And it's a pleasure to be among all these very talented women. So my name is Jen Weber, and I'm a vice president at TD Bank, and I have responsibility for the technology solutions that support TD Bank's North American contact centers, our North American ATM fleet, and then also our collections and recoveries organization. And so a little bit like Kim, I mean, we'll talk about some of our backgrounds and lived experiences, but I think the most obvious thing that I see relative to the digital divide today is the continued struggle to find technical talent, women technical talent, and the continued gender imbalance in engineering roles in every company that I've worked in. And it really is a struggle. But it's interesting because I even see it in my personal life as a mom to 2 young girls. My oldest is 7, and she's starting to say things like girls are better at reading and boys are better at math. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. And so it's amazing to me to see these stereotypes and these societal narratives start to creep in at a really, really young age. And you can see how this can continue to be a vicious cycle if we don't work against them. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, both as an IT professional, but also as a woman that's been passionate about girls in STEM and as a mom. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jen. And it does speak so much to the strength of the kind of barriers and messages that exist that girls are absorbing from such a young age. I have a similar experience where I would never have thought that those kinds of messages would make it into my house, but they do because they're so ingrained. So thank you for that. And in fact, it's a great segue into the first question that I have, which is for you, Julie. Of course, I think it's fascinating when people come to STEM fields in a roundabout way, and such an important message to say that that it is a multifaceted field, and many of you have mentioned that. But Julie, you're in a university, and that learning over the past 2 years has been so disrupted, and students have had really a lot of challenges that are, hard to wrap our heads around. So I'm interested from your perspective in how you think, this next generation of people who are going to go work for TD and Toyota, how are they making out? What are they thinking? And how is this particularly affecting girls and young women? What do you see as their kind of path forward?
Absolutely. So we've all seen that the pandemic has had a huge impact on everyone in many different ways, but you summarized it so well, Jennifer, that specifically for students, everything's been disrupted for us. So as a student, it kind of flipped my education upside down for me, and it was a lot to kind of grasp, especially being in the Bachelor of Technology program at McMaster, which is so centered around hands-on and experiential learning. Prior to the pandemic, I would honestly spend hours and hours in a lab setting every single week, directly applying concepts that I would learn in lecture in the lab. And I got really used to that setup. We would have conversations with our professors, and our professors would say, "See you in 2 days. What we just talked about, we're actually going to do." And that's not really an option anymore. I'm getting my education solely through my computer. So it's very different. And honestly, without technology, it would not be possible for me to be graduating in a couple months. And so this is a really eye-opening thought, and it's something that I honestly reflect on quite a bit, because the reality is there's now a direct correlation between someone's academic success and their access to technology. And these barriers, they don't sit well with me, and they didn't sit well with many of my peers. So something that we had to do was have open conversations with our professors. We had to acknowledge the barriers that were present in our classroom and discuss how we could accommodate some of those. And in my experience, my professors were ready to listen, and we kind of redesigned the virtual classroom together. But it's not fully barrier free. That's the reality of it. So there are some adjustments we could make to make it a little bit better. And one interesting thing I thought I'd share is that I've noticed quite a shift in the assessment style for students recently. So typically we'd go into a huge auditorium, write a really long exam with lots of people around, and that's of course not an option anymore. So that's kind of gone by the wayside, I've found, and many of my professors are changing our assessments to be more application based, a lot more case studies, sometimes longer assessment periods, so that there was less pressure on technology for a short window of time to write a test. And personally, I really enjoyed this shift because it helped me feel a lot more career ready. Now, I of course miss the hands-on learning that comes with being in a lab. I will always feel that the lab is my home. But there are some benefits that I've also noticed from online learning, and in particular, I've actually started participating in class a lot more. I've started asking a lot more questions, and that's because a lot of my classes are on Zoom, and I'm able to directly message my professor and ask questions. And my peers don't know that I'm asking questions or that I'm sharing these ideas. And it's allowed me to actually take a lot more risks with my learning. In an in-person setting, I always felt this need to be perfect in class because I felt that I needed to prove my place in the classroom. And so I've actually quite enjoyed that I can answer a question and I might be wrong, and that's okay because I'm going to learn from that as well. So it really is a unique opportunity to remove that fear of judgment. And I've honestly met some of my best friends in my program, but we do need to recognize the unfortunate reality that academia is not always the most welcoming place for women and for many minority groups. So I always did enter the classroom with some fear of judgment in the back of my mind. And so that's part of my hope for the next generation of girls in tech, is that fear of judgment is removed. So like I did reiterate that my education was flipped upside down, but not only for me at a university level, but while this was happening for me, I was also watching education change for students in kindergarten to grade 12. So working with the team at Venture Academy while figuring out my own education changes, we were reimagining as a team education plans and engagement plans for youth in kindergarten to grade 12. So I've seen firsthand the impact of the pandemic, not only on my education and how technology became the main focus of my life, but how that also happened for students in kindergarten to grade 12. And so one of my hopes for the next generation of girls in tech is that they use technology as a support and as a resource rather than relying on it as heavily as we do right now. I worry for youth in kindergarten to grade 12 that they might look back at this period in their childhood and resent technology. They might look back and remember those 2 years that they stared at a screen and that's all they did. And I worry about that a lot because technology, when it is provided to you and it's accessible to you, enables you to create some fantastic solutions and makes your work a lot more efficient. But if we have a whole generation of people that are resenting technology, it concerns me that they won't want to use it to provide those solutions. And then, like I mentioned, just hoping that the next generation of girls in tech doesn't have the fear of judgment that many of us faced.
Julie, that is so fantastic. And I mean, I love so much of what you said. I especially love the fact that you and others have sort of kind of stepped up and said, like, this is how this could be better for us. And I hope that we can take those learnings and really apply that to how we redesign things post-pandemic. But I also think the last point you made is absolutely critical for those of us who work in this field from a thought leadership perspective. Is like, how do we now talk about and provide guidance about just engagement with technology, knowing this complex relationship that youth will have with screens. So thank you for that, Julie. Kim, I'm going to shift to you and talk sort of on the other end, which is women in the workforce. And we all know how underrepresented women in technology fields are, especially in a field like automotive with Toyota. So talk to us a little bit. You're part of the group inside Toyota called Women Influencing and Impacting Toyota, which is meant to really encourage more female engagement. Could you talk about some of the strategies that you're using to both attract and retain women within the workforce?
Absolutely. So, by the way, the nickname for the acronym of Women Influencing, Empowering, and in Toyota is WIT. So WIT is actually an employee-driven group. It's a group that we have sponsorship right up to a VP level. One of our male advocates who really does support what we do is empowering women in the workforce. There's, you can imagine the stigma, automotive, cars, right? Technology. So we've created this forum called WIT to better understand the challenges of women. What's so interesting is as we have various conversations or keynotes is how many of our allies and mentors that we have that are male who are so interested in the conversation. It isn't just about women. It's about how do we as a society better utilize and diversify our skill sets and make the non-traditional roles more appealing to women. Things like a sales role or technology. And I think we have to do a better job marketing some of that stuff ourselves. So it doesn't just sound like it's all about a man's world. One of the things, and as we have a number of girls in this, we have a very, very strong co-op program at TCI. And what I find so interesting about our co-op program, we really do look at shared initiatives across various groups across the company. But one of the things we're finding more and more is we interview people like yourself, Julie, or these young university folks, girls that are going through. Their ask is about what are you doing about women in leadership? And our WIP program has actually become a differentiator. They want a voice, they want to participate, they want to have a say, and we are trying to break that. It's a digital divide, but it's also the gender divide, right? I've also seen in the last couple of years a real shift in the conversation with my female team members, whether it's in a different department or even in IS, where they will now reach out and be bold enough or brave enough to ask for coaching or mentoring, or how do I get through these challenges? Even as recently as yesterday, one of my team who I've known for a lot of years said, would you be willing to go through my 360-degree assessment with me to help me move to the next level? That's not something I've seen 5 years ago. That's something I'm seeing now. And I think things like WIT, the fact that the divides are becoming more of a conversation piece. Something that Jen said that really resonated with me. She's my stepdaughter, but she's my daughter. at one point her mother, and no disrespect to her mom, was saying, oh, you could, go out and, do a career as a librarian. And I'm like, no, you are really, and not that there's, by the way, nothing wrong with being a librarian, but here's a kid at the age of 14 who is really smart, head of student council, finance, computer savvy. And I'm going, no, you can be anything you want. You can be that leader. You're a natural project manager. And the conversation that was coming into the house is like, no, why are we boxing ourselves at? And I think that's so important. And I think that's what WIT has also done for TCI, is we've started to break down some of the silos of the conversation.
So important. It cannot be addressed if the conversation is not ongoing, and if we're not open about what the actual barriers are. So thank you for that. I'm going to go to you, Jen. We know that women are less likely to go into STEM careers, more likely to leave. We know all the stats. One of the ones that continues to plague us is that over half of women in tech roles leave by the age of 35. And you mentioned this in your introduction. You did not take a traditional path into tech related career, but you've been able to really advance in technology related roles. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how did you stay in it? What was the stickiness factor for you? And what do you think is necessary for the, men, women, industry at large to actually make the tech sector more appealing and more equitable?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Jennifer. So as you mentioned, I'm not a technologist by education, and I honestly never expected to end up in this field. And so way back in the 90s, I feel like I can say way back in the 90s because it's more than 20 years ago, right out of undergraduate school, I was lucky enough to be part of what I think is a bit of an experiment at the time. So a large IT and management consulting firm decided to pilot a program, which was essentially a boot camp of sorts. And they went on campus and hired a large cohort of non-techies like myself. And they put us into a technical training program, and then they staffed us on clients. So now, boot camps are much more common, but they certainly weren't 25 years ago. And there certainly weren't a lot of women in technology, especially back then. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But, once I really got going, a bit like Kim, I realized how much I love technology and that I was actually good at it. But for me personally, there were a few things that were big differentiators in my experience. One is exposure. I didn't know as a young girl that STEM or technology was an option for me. Even though my dad was actually an engineer and an inventor, believe it or not, I didn't know this was an option for me. And I think the stereotypes and norms for me were a really strong influence as a child in terms of helping to shape what I thought was the right career path for me. And it wasn't until someone took a risk on me and helped me see this path and see this opportunity that I actually thought, yeah, I can do this, and I'm actually good at this. And then I think the second thing is mentors and role models. There were no women role models in STEM at all, and there were no mentors. And I started to eventually see them in the workplace, but they were still few and far between. And I know, this has changed a bit since then. But there's still so much we need to do to close the gender divide in STEM. And that's why I've always been really, really passionate about this throughout my career. And I think the one thing I also have to say is I have to acknowledge my own privilege. I mean, I went to a 4-year college. I am white. I grew up middle class. And when I think about those things, I realize how many more barriers exist that I didn't have to face that need to be addressed in order to really close this gap. So we have a lot to do.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you for acknowledging that and how important that is to this whole conversation. And shifting to you, Denise. You know, in your work, and we've had the chance to work together in the past, and we share the belief that technology is an incredibly powerful tool for social change and for community development. It's what it's how your work is grounded. Also in the belief that reconciliation and innovation go hand in hand, and that we will not achieve our full potential in innovation if we do not have diverse perspectives at the table. We also know that for many Indigenous youth and youth living in rural and remote communities, access to that technology is still extremely challenging, and that includes obviously the hardware, but also access to Wi-Fi. How are you, or how do we create opportunities for Indigenous youth to make sure that they're bringing their strengths and talents to the digital economy when there's such basic access challenges that still exist?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. I do think a lot about that, and I think even though technology is a tool for social change and community development, certainly, the hard truth is that the current telecommunications system in Canada and the technology/data industry globally is not really designed for social change and community development. It's really not. Canada actually views access to broadband, I'd say very similarly to how it views access to rail infrastructure in the early 1900s. The policies are actually very similar, and so are the regulatory systems. The model's all about density and return on investment. So you only get a station in your town if there's a likelihood of promising economic development, therefore demand, therefore profit, therefore market share. So we've designed a system where we rely wholly on market forces to solve for our human rights, equity and reconciliation. And I've not seen examples, honestly, of how market forces have done that. So I think no matter how much government subsidization, connectivity and innovation programming to connect the least desirable to connect, I fear we still might be asking the wrong question about how and why and who to connect. And I fear we could be moving massive amounts of resources into the wrong solutions and companies potentially. So, I guess
what's the right question, Denise?
Yeah, so for me, it's an ethical, moral, philosophical question to me more than it is a technology question. Like the technologies to connect everyone, have us all participating in digital society, they already exist. So you can see my point. Like, why are we talking today about why families with children, Indigenous families, or families that are newcomers to Canada have the worst and yet the most expensive connectivity and hardware? When did we choose as a society that it would be normal and okay to not have access if you couldn't pay millions for a home or thousands a month for rent? Like, where along the line did we determine that kind of patriarchal system that forces us to pull at the pant leg of government and industry to connect us to the platform required to participate in society and economy would just be expected. So my point is, why on earth do kids need a business case to have a future in digital society? To me, those are the questions and part of the truth I want to daylight. So we can build something better for future generations, but it doesn't happen by relying on expecting the same worldviews and values that built that to shift that and change our fate. We have to move quickly, and I think precisely to lift up voices and lived experiences into seats of power and decision making, so that we're not just solving for profitability at worst and basic access at best, but we're solving for a more global solution, ensuring that all us as humanity, that we are harnessing the most powerful thing we've ever built collectively for good. And I think it's that serious. So, in BC, we're building the first Indigenous digital equity strategy at the First Nations Technology Council to get the right people around the right tables to ensure Indigenous leadership is centered. We're trying to launch the first Indigenous Innovation Institute here in BC to build the skills and both technically and in leadership to advance the work long into the future. And we're working hard to support tech and innovation ecosystem in BC with our Moving Beyond Inclusion work that's helping to create systemic change from within. So that's where we're starting, and I encourage everyone, to be an ally in that work, I just leave you with my honest belief that Indigenous people's internet access and sovereignty in the digital future is also your access and freedom too. This is a movement really grounded in our human-centered and heart-centered shared liberation, humanity, and dignity. And we're really establishing this for a connected future we've not even really imagined. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Denise. And the message is just so critical for all of us to hear and to share again and again and again. And one of the things that has struck me through the pandemic period at a much, like, in a more general way, is the lack of understanding across the country about access, about how many youth still struggle with this. Like, forget about this, not forget about, but what comes next is understanding what systems exist to actually drive that and to continue to uphold that. But every single time I spoke this past year and in the media, it was always something that people were surprised to hear, how many, the stories. And we work with a partner, for example, in Peel, in the Peel area, and story after story of the family who, the mom with all 4 kids in the car, who's sitting in the parking lot trying to get Wi-Fi access with one device being shared among all the kids in the car to try to have them be connected. And that's sort of held up as a success story in a way. And so we need to keep sharing those stories and then, creating the opening for people like you two, who can come in and really help us to understand the inequities that are baked into these systems. So thank you for that. And Eugenia, your story is such an important one and so interesting. You grew up in community housing and often had to fight for access yourself to education. After overcoming those challenges, you went on to earn a PhD in chemistry. You run one of the most innovative, important organizations in this space, Visions of Science. Your story tells us so much. But one of the things that struck me in preparing for this is in a media article that I read in Toronto Life magazine. You spoke about those challenges in accessing education, but also navigating the relationship that you had personally with teachers. And we all, work in some capacity with teachers and educators to support advancement in this field. But can you speak, based on your own personal experience and your experience with Visions, about the role that parents and educators play in bridging this this gap in digital divide?
Yeah, I think, thank you again for having me. And I think really, when it comes to, when we think about technology, the digital divide, it goes to kind of what you mentioned, Denise. If what is going to change things is folks who are representative and have lived experiences at the table, we also need to really critically understand what is keeping them from getting there. And I think education, it's clear that education is a huge gatekeeper in terms of who participates in STEM and who doesn't. And when I think about my personal experience with the education system, it was a lot of advocacy that actually got me through. You would think that someone with the aptitude to succeed and to excel, that would just be enough, but it wasn't. And literally every grade at every stage, I happened to have a mom who knew how to advocate for me and knew how to kind of navigate through a system that was never built for me to succeed. And really just acknowledging that. And I think, over the last year and a half with, not only what happened with COVID and, the switch to digital, but everything that we're kind of understanding with just these racial reckonings, across North America, it's clear that there is an inconsistency and a systemic issue that we're facing when it comes to race and how that plays, how that impacts how, children of color, particularly Black children, interact and engage with the school system. So that's the backdrop of kind of what I was going into. And it's not until I reflected back to really understand, okay, I had very unique and interesting experiences. And it wasn't until I started talking about them that I realized that there was a problem, but also a consistency in shared experience amongst my peers. I often talk about a situation with a guidance counselor, and this was my main, very fateful conversation about if I was going to go and take the 3 sciences or not. That grade 10 to grade 11 year, biology, chemistry, and physics, and I was told that it would be too hard for me and I shouldn't even bother. It, despite having top grades and even top amongst my peers. And again, my mom had to intervene and advocate on my behalf to really make sure that I didn't listen to that advice and actually went through different channels to be able to get into those courses. And it actually took weeks of legwork to do that. That being said, every time I share that story, I get so many DMs, so many people that say they had the exact same experience and almost verbatim the same messages communicated back to them. We have a problem. That is a problem. And that tells me that this is not like, fluke, one bad apple. There's a systemic problem in terms of how, how the system sees Black youth sometimes and how that impacts things. I know for myself as a young Black woman, having to navigate that really messed with my head too. And we know this as women on the panel, just like reconciling that. And, as women in general, we face societal pressures with, how confidence is perceived. But I think I had this added pressure of, as a Black woman, my confidence was seen as aggression and violence in some cases, and how that played into what I had to navigate through. And after all of that, I'm just trying to enjoy science. I'm just trying to enjoy technology. I'm just trying to get ahead, but I'm having to think about all of this stuff in grade 3. It's a lot. So I think that educators play a huge role. Education is the gatekeeper, period. And recognizing that and knowing how do we really bridge that barrier and understanding that there's a lot of unseen work. And, Jennifer, you both talked about you as moms, how you've kind of had to be and be like, oh, that's not a thing. The unseen work that parents have to do to be able to navigate through this system is something that we also need to be really mindful of and think about resource allocation there. I had a level of privilege with my mom, coming here as an immigrant from Ghana, but being highly educated in Ghana. So for her, she's just like, absolutely not. I know what my child is worth. So none of that's going to come. That's not going to happen here. But not everyone comes with that same energy for whatever reason. So it's really important to recognize that. Yeah.
I love your mom. It's a great story, but it's so critical for us to understand the amount of advocacy, even, for myself coming from such a spot of privilege, the amount of advocacy I find myself doing on behalf of my girls, on a daily basis, whether it's to them or to other people in their worlds or to the systems that they move in. It has surprised me more than anything else that I've done in my career in this space. Thank you for sharing that that work, and I think all of us, the continued need to be speaking very loudly about this and to continue working at a young age, and that's why I love that we're talking about this topic from a systems view and of course at a community level. I just wanted to give a quick reminder to people that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat for these presenters. I'm going to do a very quick go around to everyone of a question, the same question to all of you before we look at any questions. I'm wondering if you could just, in a very quick minute, and I know it's a big question, but tell us why closing that gender digital divide is more important than ever before in Canada, and what would that mean to our society and to our economy if we were able to do that? So I'm going to start with you, Denise. What do you think?
Well, I think I touched on it. I really do think that worldview is so important, and I really do think lived experience is so important, because I think that different design opportunities present themselves when there's more diversity at the table. I mean, I think we know that. We know that about business. We know that about governance. I think the same is true if we take a systems approach to how we want to design digital society. And so, I'm interested in what women will bring to these spaces, and specifically, I'm interested what the next generation of women will bring. And so I take it as my own personal responsibility to make sure that they're not thinking about things like how to get the internet, like they're having more interesting conversations about how to deal with AI in the health system, about all the different ways that we're going to see digital convergence into our lives. And so I really am passionate about setting the right platform for the next generation of women to really thrive and build, something that I hope, and you probably heard in my comments, something that I hope is a bit better than the direction we're going now. So I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Julie.
Hello. Sorry, it took me a second to find the unmute button
okay.
there. But from my perspective, again, I'm speaking very much from the student voice here. I honestly believe that we're not going to fully understand the impacts of the gender divide in technology that the pandemic has really highlighted. I don't think we're going to fully understand it until this generation of students begins to enter the workforce, and we see that demographic shift in a direction we may not want. So I personally think that closing this gap is so important, because if we close it, we won't see those impacts trickle down the line in the workforce. And I honestly think that, Eugenia, you highlighted it so well, that education is the gatekeeper here. I've looked around with my peers, and many students decided to take a year away from school because they were concerned about their access to technology in order to finish their degree. So I think that it's so important that we close this gap so that education is not the barrier here, and access to technology and education, and we don't see this trickle down the line in the workforce. Because in the workforce, we really need to ensure that we are having employees in the workforce that are representing our entire society, because especially in technology, you're designing solutions to benefit society, and you need to have those solutions benefit all of society and not just a portion of it. I think is really important.
Thank you, Julie. Kim? Some quick thoughts.
I think it's really important that between the digital divide and COVID, this virtual world we're in, that we don't lose the voice of women, that connectivity, that engagement. So if they can't get access and they're trying to balance home and school and kids, does that advocacy change? Does it change because now you're virtual versus present, like in a school system, and being able to hold on to people and get to people? I think it's important that we continue to drive that agenda, that women's voices are heard, that girls look at STEM and go, this is exciting. We have an overall shortage of talent within IT, male or female, doesn't matter. And we need as many skilled technologists as possible. And I think we're into a huge shift right now in technology. And where is it going? But what's really important here is increasing the percentage of female within IT is critical, in addressing the shortage, making it interesting, making it accessible. We need to do this. We don't have an option, because this is how we as a society need to come together to address an economy, and figuring out ways to give people that access, that opportunity becomes just uber critical.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kim and Julie touched on some of these, as well as Denise. I think this is about our future as a society, and creating a more equitable society and economy, not just for women, but racialized women, where everyone has the opportunity to participate. They have the confidence they need to thrive. They have the skills and the access that they need to, ensure that they have income stability and a future place in our society. And so I think there's a big humanity piece of this, and I'm honestly fearful that more jobs are requiring digital skills, even jobs that are not in the tech sector. And so we honestly have to take these steps in order to prevent us from taking a step back in terms of some of these equity items as the world changes and jobs get more digitized. Like there is a burning platform and we need to address it. So
Eugenia.
I think it's hard to go last here because everyone said all the things and it's so true. But I echo everything that everyone said, and I'll also just add, I think the urgency around this, like we got to get going, we can't wait. And for me, again, everything that I've heard around this table, there are so many barriers that also feel like this is not the best potential or the greatest use of time. So let's eliminate those, let's get rid of those, and let's get people at the right tables solving the pressing issues, and let's get women there, because we should be there and we're well positioned to make some incredible change. So for me, there's this urgency and this let's get it.
Seriously, I feel like the urgency is just, I think we need to be screaming from the rooftops about this right now. And the amount of loss we've had through pandemic of women just engaging in this sector, but writ large in the workforce is urgent. So I'm just going to go to a question, and Jen, this kind of, well, it speaks to what a lot of you have spoken about, but what can we do to educate parents on opportunities available to their daughters in tech and science? So we're setting the stage. This is always the top question, because even though this audience is made up of a lot of people who are working in the tech space or in, looking at it from the world of work, there's a lot of people who care about girls, whether it's their daughters, their nieces, their, whoever it is, just the next generation. So quickly, if anyone wants to respond to that, what are the top tips? Just flag me if you want to speak. Eugenia, do you want to address that first?
I wasn't ready for being first. So.
Okay, not to put you on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim, would you like to jump in and then we'll come back?
I think the way we can help parents, it also starts with all the girls on this call, all the people listening. Believe anything is possible.
Yeah.
And that might sound, very like in quotes or something like that. But you also need to advocate for yourself, or that ask for help. And that may be unfair if you're, in grade 3 and you don't even know you have to do that. But as you're coming into university and stuff, asking that parent, because the parent may not even know how to help you. And I'll tell you, we as parents don't have more instructions than you get with a toaster, right? So we may not even realize you need that advocacy. So sometimes give your parents a little bit of a break and give them a nudge and say, I need help.
That's great. Does anyone else want to?
I mean, this is a big topic, so I was hesitant to even jump in, because I think there's things that we can do to educate parents, but there's so much behind that. I mean, parents rely on school systems to educate their children. And I think it goes back to what Eugenia said. And I mean, I was even reading something recently, just because I have 2 girls, about how the math anxiety of teachers in grade school, who are predominantly women, have a negative impact mainly on girls' math aptitude and their success in math and their future beliefs about math. And so I think we could talk for hours probably about this topic, but I think there's a lot around the education system that we need to help support and enable, and help aid parents in helping their children be successful and helping their daughters be successful in STEM programs. And so there's probably more than we have time to get into. And but that's sort of where I go with that question, is actually back to the education system.
Because as you know, you can have all of the messages in the world at home, but the other systems that girls engage with are so incredibly powerful. So
Yeah,
those need to be
absolutely.
shifted.
Yeah.
Would anyone else like to share on that before we're almost at our time?
I would just quickly say, like, I just concur with what you said, Jen. I think it's a really, really big and wicked a problem, but I think it's something that really needs to be addressed. And I know that in the age, I think we also need to kind of understand the times. A lot of parents had to play the role of educator through this pandemic year, and they were able to see some of the challenges. But I know a lot of parents who were able to see kind of some of the potential in terms of like, okay, perhaps there are supports that I can, a network of support that I can provide my child outside of the classroom that can help facilitate this. So I think there's a lot of interesting conversations about the new role that parents might play in their child's education and how that can kind of help address some of the barriers. So it's an
Yeah,
interesting conversation.
I agree. I agree,
Mhm,
Julia.
mhm.
I want to just end by thanking you all for bringing forward such important angles and thoughts on this topic. It's such a huge topic. It cannot adequately be addressed in 1 hour. But I'm so grateful for all of the work that you are all doing day in and day out on this topic. And I hope that people listening and participating today are inspired and motivated to use your voices and whatever platforms you have to keep this issue at the forefront, to make sure that people understand that this gap exists. This gap has massive social and economic um, implications and impacts if we do not address it. And I know everybody on this call has the ability to do that in some way. And so I thank you all for participating and for the work that you're going to continue doing in this topic area. I really encourage you to share any additional ideas or thoughts that you have using the hashtags for this event, which are Digital Divide CA. So please do that, and certainly reach out to me at Actua CEO on Twitter, or to any of the panelists who all have so much more to share than what we could get out in an hour. So thank you all, and thank you all for attending. I wish you the best day. Thanks. Nice to see all your faces.
Thank you.